The white veil looked wrong in the street. It tumbled across the hardpan like a lost ghost, skimming wagon ruts and beer glass shards outside the Coyote Saloon. On that wind there was a church bell memory, a single chime that never quite finished, like a promise cut short. Eli Maddox stood there with dust in his teeth and a nicked knuckle pressed against his lip, watching the veil catch on a thorn and shiver to a stop. Some weddings end with rice. This one ended with hoof thunder and the long cold silence that follows a shot. He tasted iron from the split in his mouth and told himself not to look back at the church doors. He looked anyway, wide open, black as the inside of a coffin, the ribbon still tied to one handle, as if the knot were the only thing holding the world together. Inside, pews leaned at angles from the stampede of scared townfolk, psalms trampled into sawdust. The lamp by the altar still smoked. Sister Rosita's kerchief lay folded on the rail, a square of mercy forgotten in the rush. Eli stooped, lifted the veil careful as you would a wounded bird, and felt the grit sewn into it by the street. He could still see her behind that lace, the quick smile, the steady eyes. Mara Delaney, bride by morning, shadow by afternoon. A horse snorted in the alley. Jonah Reed peered around the water barrel, eyes too big for his face. "Mr. Maddox," he whispered, "Sheriff says you shouldn't be here." "Sheriff says many things," Eli said, voice even. It was a voice like a tin cup set upside down, hollow, ready to catch whatever fell. Was there a letter? Jonah swallowed, nodded, and fished in his vest. He gave up a folded scrap tied with a pale blue thread. Eli recognized the thread. It had cinched Mara's bouquet. He read. 4 lines. A soft knife. Eli, go to the arroyo south of Devil's Table before sundown. Come alone. Trust me just this once. M. The veil fluttered in his hand like it wanted to fly back to her. He tucked it inside his coat and felt Sheriff Boone arrive before he heard the bootsteps. Boone's badge caught a splinter of late light and threw it onto Eli's jaw like a brand. "Afternoon, Maddox," Boone drawled. "Troublesome day for vows. A veil was left in the street," Eli said. "I'm just tidying up." Boone's smile didn't touch his eyes. "Order is my job. Your job, far as I can tell, is to ride out and not ride back. Folks say a bride ran. Some say she was taken. Either way, Asa Pike don't like free-floating rumors. They stain things." "Rumors ain't what stains a town," Eli said. Boone's hand drifted near his holster, then away an easy dance, not quite a threat, more like a reminder. "You find your answers quick, Scout, and don't go stirring up wind you can't bottle." The badge walked off. The bell in Eli's memory finally finished its chime, a low note that settled into his bones. He turned the letter over. No second message. No map. Mara knew he didn't need one. He'd ridden that arroyo by starlight, by stormlight, by the pale breath of winter dawn. He could find it blind and backward. Sister Rosita slipped out of the church like a shadow escaping a cage. "Senor Maddox," she said softly, "what God joins, men must not break. But men break things anyway. Come your lip." She dabbed at the split with clean water and something that stung. "You were kind to our horses last winter," she murmured. "I remember hands that gentle. Do not let them turn hard now." He didn't answer. Her eyes searched his face, and then, as if finding what she wished she hadn't, she touched the cross at her throat. "The wind tells me lies today," she said. "I hear your name in it. Everyone's name is on the wind," Eli said. "It's just a matter of who's listening." Old Tahoma stood at the far end of the street, still as a hitching post, only the braids moving in the restless air. He lifted 2 fingers in greeting. Eli returned the sign. They needed no talk. Men who read tracts like scripture kept their words wrapped in leather. By the time the sun slid lower, Eli had saddled the dun mare and ridden south. The town undone itself behind him, buildings shrinking to toys, the bell to a button, the veil a weight against his ribs. The land opened. A wide book of ochre pages, creased by arroyos, signed by mesquite. Vultures wrote circles overhead. Somewhere ahead, Devil's Table, flat-topped and mean, held court over the Badlands like a judge who'd sold his gavel. He reached the first dry wash and dismounted, letting the mare drink shadows from the cracked bed. He crouched, fingers on the dirt. Tracks. 2 horses, shod. A third, lighter, a woman's seat, by the set of it, by the shallow dig of the heels. Fresh. He could smell the iron tang where a stone had nicked a shoe. "Mara," he said to the emptiness, and the emptiness held his voice a moment before swallowing it. He followed. Every 50 yards he stopped, let his breath slow, listened. A cricket stitched the silence. A coyote's thought crossed low brush and vanished. Then there, a scuff not made by hooves. A boot, broad heel. Asa Pike's riders wore heels like that, because a man with money likes to hear himself announce. At the bend before the table, the arroyo widened into a shallow amphitheater. Sunlight pooled there in a pale, dying bowl. Eli reined in and studied the high rock to the east, good perch for a rifle. The west ridge mirrored it. He saw no glint, no movement. He smelled creosote and something that felt like Sunday clothes burned in a stove. The letter had said before sundown. He was on time. He was alone. He slid from the saddle and stepped into the bowl with his hands open, empty, like a man walking into a baptism. "Mara," he called soft. Footsteps answered from behind the west ridge. A figure descended, veilless, hair unpinned, dress torn where the desert had asked questions. Mara Delaney, ribbon gone, eyes fierce as if they'd been sharpening themselves all afternoon. "Eli," she said, breath catching his name like it hurt and soothed her all at once. "Thank God." He moved 3 steps toward her and stopped because old Tahoma's warning given once long ago by a fire came back like a cinder. The first thing you reach for in a dry land is often the thing that burns you. Mara lifted a hand. "Don't," she said. "If you love me, stand right where you are." Something clicked above them, metal shyly meeting metal. Then another, left side. Then a third, in front, where he had seen nothing. The sound braided itself into a noose. Mara swallowed and looked at the ground between them. "I told them you'd come alone," she whispered. "So I kept my word." Eli didn't turn his head. He let the wind tell him what it could. 3 rifles, at least. 2 up high, 1 low. The scent of pipe tobacco he knew belonged to Sheriff Boone. And beneath that, the cologne that had no business in the desert. Asa Pike stepped out from the east ridge, coat smooth, smile like polished bone. "Evening, Mr. Maddox," he said, mild as milk. A bride should never be kept waiting. I find punctual men easy to bury. Mara's eyes pleaded with Eli, pleaded for something he couldn't name. The sun let go of its last edge and the bowl fell into amber shadow. A hawk cried once, high and ragged. Eli lifted Mara's veil from inside his coat and let the wind take it. It sailed up, soft and white, toward the rifles he still would not look at. When the lace touched the barrel of the nearest gun, a shot cracked the bowl and the veil bloomed with a dark flower. The crack of the rifle still echoed when the veil sagged, a torn banner surrendering to the dust. Eli did not move. He had stood too long in ambushes to waste motion now. Instead, he counted 1 echo, 2, 3, and let his ears measure the silence that followed. Mara flinched as the shot rang out, but her eyes never left Eli's. "I begged them not to," she whispered, the words trembling loose, carried on the dry wind. Asa Pike strolled closer, boots crunching shale. He carried his wealth in his posture, shoulders back, chin high, coat brushed clean even in this wilderness. The cattle baron was a man who believed money outranked bullets, though he kept both at hand. "Now that I have your attention, Maddox," he said, "we'll discuss matters proper." Eli's jaw clenched. "Seems you already opened the discussion." The sheriff's voice floated from the ridge. "Careful, Eli. Ain't but one way down from here, and every way out belongs to Asa. Calder Boone's badge glimmered in the last breath of sun, but it felt less like law and more like a price tag. Eli let his eyes wander Mara's way. She looked torn between chains and freedom, standing with her hands half clenched, as if she couldn't decide whether to reach for him or shield herself. "Why?" he asked her, plain as a prayer. Her throat worked, but no words came. Asa saved her the burden. "Because loyalty is a coin, Maddox, and I pay better than you ever could." Old Tahoma's lesson echoed in Eli's memory. When the trap closes, do not pull against it, make it close tighter. Then slip out the hinge. He drew a breath, let it carry dust into his lungs, and raised his voice so the hidden rifles could hear. "All right, Pike, you win. Tell your men to come collect my guns." Pike blinked, surprised. Sensible at last. He gestured. A gunman rose from the west ridge, descending careful, rifle ready. Mara's lips parted as if to speak, but she pressed them shut. Boone stayed up high, his rifle trained, while another shadow shifted east. Eli held steady, hands loose at his sides. When the first outlaw came close, reaching for Eli's Colt, the mare snorted behind them. Jonah Reed had followed, the fool boy, hiding in the arroyo's curve with wide eyes. His boots scraped stone, loud in the hush. The outlaw whirled. The rifle swung Jonah's way. Eli moved. Fast as dry lightning, his hand cut through air, caught the outlaw's barrel, wrenched it sideways. The gun barked, the shot carving sparks off rock instead of Jonah's chest. In the same motion, Eli drove his shoulder into the man's jaw. Bone cracked. The outlaw crumpled like a dropped sack. Chaos answered. From the ridge, Boone fired wild, the bullet whining off stone near Eli's ear. Asa Pike cursed, ducking behind a boulder as dust spat around him. Mara screamed a name Eli couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. Old Tahoma's warning lived in Eli's blood. Every ambush makes its own doorway. He yanked the outlaw's rifle from the dirt, spun, and fired once into the east ridge. A figure toppled, rolling hard, rifle clattering against rock. Another shot whistled back, grazing Eli's coat, tearing cloth but not skin. Jonah scrambled to Eli's side, shaking. "Mr. Maddox, stay low," Eli growled, pushing the boy flat. Then he looked at Mara. She stood frozen, veil gone, hair whipping like black fire. "Run!" he barked, but she didn't move. Her eyes were full of something heavier than fear. Regret, maybe, or a secret she hadn't yet dared spill. Asa Pike rose from behind the rock, pistol in hand now, face twisted but voice steady. "You'll not leave here, Maddox. This arroyo will be your grave. The bride has chosen her side." The sun slid fully away, leaving only a bruised twilight. Shadows thickened. The desert held its breath. Eli lifted the rifle, steady, not on Pike, not on Boone, but aimed at the sky. One shot split the dark, a flare of fire and sound. A signal, far off, faint at first, then closer the answering thrum of hooves. Old Tahoma had not stayed in town. He was coming, and the arroyo would soon be crowded with more than shadows. Hoofbeats rolled like thunder through the desert bowl, echoing off the stone as if a storm itself had descended into the arroyo. Eli braced the borrowed rifle against his shoulder, the taste of gunpowder still sharp on his tongue. Dust plumes rose at the rim, and shapes emerged, riders cutting the twilight in hard silhouettes. Old Tahoma led them, his braids trailing, eyes sharp as flint. Behind him, 3 ranch hands from the far spread, men Eli had once ridden beside, now answering a signal that meant brotherhood over fear. Asa Pike's jaw tightened. "You brought help." Eli's voice was steady. "I lit the sky. They chose to ride." The sheriff cursed under his breath, shifting on the ridge, his rifle wavering between targets. Mara stood between the lines, her torn dress snapping in the wind, her hands trembling at her sides. She looked like a woman caught in 2 fires, neither willing to release her. Tahoma's horse skidded to a stop in the wash below, the old tracker swinging down easy. His gaze touched Mara, then Asa, then Boone. Finally it settled on Eli. "This place smells of lies," he said, voice low and certain. "And lies always burn." Asa raised his pistol. "This is my land, old man. My law." Tahoma shook his head. "The land belongs to the wind. You belong to greed." The air trembled, waiting for someone to make the first mistake. Boone licked his lips, his finger tightening on the trigger. Jonah Reed crouched low behind a boulder, eyes darting from Eli to Mara, then back again. Mara finally spoke, her voice cracked but strong. "Stop this! Eli, go. Take the boy and leave. You can't win against them." Eli's gaze caught hers. "Then why call me here?" Her lips trembled. "Because I had to choose. And I chose wrong." Asa barked a laugh. "You chose survival, girl. And survival pays." Tahoma's hand brushed the hilt of his knife. The ranch hands spread out, horses stamping, ready to charge. The night deepened, stars prickling into view above Devil's Table. Eli's heart thudded like a drum. He lifted the rifle, barrel steady, and aimed not at Asa, not at Boone, but at the sky once more. The shot cracked, a second signal. This time the answering sound was closer, the rumble of wagons, the shout of townsfolk who had followed the dust trail out of fear, curiosity, or maybe justice. Lanterns bobbed on the horizon, swinging like restless stars. Asa's smile faltered. Boone cursed again, backing up the ridge. Mara's breath caught, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like hope. The arroyo was no longer a trap, it was a stage. And every soul in the desert was about to witness what side the bride truly stood on. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. Lantern light spilled across the arroyo walls, painting jagged shadows that danced like restless spirits. Wagons creaked to a halt at the rim, voices rising in a mix of fear and anger. The town had come, drawn by gunfire and whispers of betrayal. Their faces flickered in the glow. Merchants, ranch wives, drifters, all watching as if judgment itself had called court beneath Devil's Table. Asa Pike turned, pistol still in hand, his confidence wavering. "You fools think this is a meeting," he barked. "This is a reckoning, and I hold the weight." Sheriff Boone climbed down from the ridge, his rifle aimed not at Eli, but at the crowd above. "Listen here, Pike keeps the beef on your tables, keeps your pockets lined. Best remember who feeds you before you go howling like strays." A murmur rippled through the townsfolk. Some lowered their lanterns. Others tightened their grip, suspicion darkening their eyes. Eli stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. "You talk about feeding them, Boone. But what about the cattle gone missing, the waterholes fenced off, the men buried quiet in the mesquite? That ain't feeding, that's bleeding." Gasps echoed, and old Tahoma's voice carried like gravel rolling down a slope. "Truth wears no veil. It stands naked in the dust." Asa sneered, turning his pistol toward the tracker. "Careful, old man." Mara's cry cut sharp. "Stop! Enough blood!" She rushed forward, standing between Asa and Tahoma, her chest heaving. Her torn gown shimmered in the lantern light, half bride, half widow already. "Tell them, Mara," Eli said, voice low but clear. "Tell them who you stand with." Her gaze swung from Eli to Asa, from the dust-stained scout to the cattle baron polished in wealth. Her lips quivered, her hands clutched at the frayed lace still dangling from her sleeve. "I made a promise," she whispered. "To me," Asa pressed, stepping closer. "A promise of loyalty. A wife's promise." Mara turned to Eli, eyes wet but unblinking. "And before that, I made a promise to him, to the man who carried me out of the Pecos flood, who put bread in my hand when I had nothing. Eli Maddox." The arroyo hushed. Even the wind seemed to lean closer. Boone spat into the dirt. "Woman's words don't change the iron in my hand." But Asa's pistol wavered. His grip loosened as townsfolk shifted, some whispering Mara's name, others nodding at Eli. The spell of money was breaking, thread by thread. Eli raised his chin. "You've heard her. Now it's your turn, Pike. Drop the gun. Face the truth you've been buying your way around." For the first time, Asa Pike looked uncertain. His empire trembled in the flicker of lanterns and the tremor of a bride's voice. Then the sharp crack of a single shot tore through the night. Sheriff Boone lowered his smoking rifle, eyes cold. "Truth don't pay my wage," he said. Asa Pike's pistol clattered into the dust as he staggered, clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark as oil in the lantern glow. The crowd erupted, half in screams, half in fury. Boone swung the rifle toward them, but too many hands reached for stones, for pistols, for whatever justice they could grip. And Mara stood frozen, caught between the man she betrayed, the man who bought her, and the lawman who had just rewritten the night with fire. The arroyo split into chaos. Lanterns shook, voices rose, and the night seemed to rip wide open. Sheriff Boone's rifle swept across the crowd, daring anyone to step forward. His badge gleamed under the wavering light, but it looked less like authority now, and more like a coin bought and paid for. Asa Pike groaned in the dust, blood soaking his fine coat. He clawed at the ground as though he could buy back strength with the dirt itself. Mara dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound, her gown blooming red beneath her fingers. "Don't let go," she begged, her voice raw. "Stay with me." Asa's lips curled in a bitter smile. "You chose too late." His eyes flickered once toward Eli, then dimmed as though the desert had swallowed the last of his wealth. Boone cursed, shoving his rifle skyward and firing a warning shot. Sparks rained down, scattering the crowd back a step. "Nobody moves. You think a mob can outgun me? Try it, and you'll bury your own." Eli tightened his grip on the borrowed rifle, his pulse steady despite the storm around him. He spoke clear, every word aimed like a bullet. "You just put down the man who paid you, Boone. That means you're standing on your own for once." Boone snarled. "On my own still enough to drop you, Maddox." Old Tahoma moved then, stepping into the lantern glow, calm as a stone in a river. "A lawman who kills for gold is no lawman. He is dust already." The sheriff swung his rifle toward the tracker. "One more word, and I'll—" The sound of a hammer cocking cut him off. Jonah Reed, the stable boy, stood trembling but fierce, Eli's Colt heavy in his hands, the barrel aimed straight at Boone. "You ain't sheriff to me," Jonah said, voice breaking but true. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several townsfolk raised their own pistols, others lifted stones. Boone's authority cracked like dry timber in a fire. Eli stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the sand. "You can lay down the iron, Boone, walk out alive, or you can fight a whole town and choke on the dust you made." Boone's eyes darted, calculating, sweat-cutting tracks through the dust on his face. For a heartbeat, the arroyo held still, every soul watching, every breath sharp. Then Boone grinned, teeth flashing under the lantern light. "A whole town?" he said softly. "I've killed bigger." He snapped the rifle down toward Jonah. The boy flinched. The crowd screamed. Eli moved. His shot cracked first. Boone jerked, the badge catching the lantern glow one last time before he toppled into the dust, face down, hands clutching at nothing. The echo rolled away, leaving silence. Only the wind answered, carrying smoke and the faint rustle of veils long gone. Jonah stared at Eli, wide-eyed. He was gonna—" Eli laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. "He ain't gonna anymore." Mara rose slowly from Asa's side, her gown stained with blood and dust, her eyes hollow with what she had lost and what she had revealed. She looked at Eli as if searching for the man she had once trusted, the man she had betrayed. "What happens now?" she asked, voice barely more than a breath. Eli looked around the townsfolk watching, old Tahoma waiting, Jonah trembling, the night holding its secrets. "Now," Eli said, his voice steady as iron. "The frontier decides who we really are." The night pressed heavy on the arroyo, the air thick with the scent of smoke and blood. Sheriff Boone lay still in the dirt, his badge half buried, no longer catching light. Asa Pike's body, cooling beside Mara, looked small now, just a man, stripped of money's armor, swallowed by the same dust as all others. The crowd lingered in uneasy silence, torn between fear and freedom. Lanterns bobbed like restless stars, faces caught in half-shadow, some grim with resolve, others uncertain, unwilling to step into a world without Pike's coin or Boone's gun. Eli lowered his rifle. "You all saw it. Boone made his choice. Pike bought his. The land is yours now, yours to tend or yours to let rot." A ranch wife shouted from the rim, voice sharp. "And who decides, Maddox? You? Another gunman with a better aim?" Murmurs rippled, suspicion rising. Old Tahoma stepped forward, his presence steady as stone. "No man decides alone. The desert teaches us water shared is life, water hoarded is death. The same is true of power." Some nodded, but others muttered, clutching lanterns tighter. Mara, her gown stiff with dried blood, lifted her chin. Her voice, ragged though it was, cut through the noise. "Asa promised me safety. Boone promised law. Both were lies. But Eli," she faltered, meeting his eyes, "he once promised me nothing but truth, even when it hurt." The crowd stilled. Eli felt the weight of her words settle on him like an unwanted crown. He had not come here for leadership nor for judgment. He had come for her, for answers, maybe for forgiveness. From the shadows, Jonah's young voice piped up. "He saved me. He could have run, but he didn't. That's the kind of man we need." The boy's trembling honesty stirred something. A few townsfolk lifted their lanterns higher, as if pushing back the dark together. Others looked away, afraid of what light revealed. Eli scanned the faces, the shifting loyalties. The town was cracked down the middle, one half leaning toward change, the other clinging to the old chains. A storm waited in that divide. One, he wasn't sure, could be ridden out. He turned to Mara. "You made your choice once. Make it again. Stand with them or against them. But don't stand in between." Her eyes glistened, torn open by grief and guilt. She pressed a hand to her chest, over the place where vows once rested, and whispered, "Then I stand with the truth." Old Tahoma nodded slowly, as if the desert itself had given permission. The crowd shifted, uncertain but listening, and above, the night cracked with a distant gunshot, sharp, singular, not from within the arroyo but from the hills beyond. Lanterns jerked upward, horses shrieked, a voice carried on the wind, cruel and mocking. "You thought Asa was the end. He was only the gate. The real debt comes due tonight." The townsfolk froze. Eli's hand found the rifle again. Mara's breath caught. From the rim of the arroyo, more riders appeared, their silhouettes hard against the stars, their numbers too many to count. The true storm had arrived. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The new riders poured over the rim like a flood loosed from a broken dam. Lantern light glinted off rifle barrels, off iron spurs that clinked like chains. The townsfolk gasped and drew back, their lanterns quivering as the dust swallowed them. Eli counted at least a dozen hard men, faces wrapped in kerchiefs, eyes glinting wolfish in the starlight. Their leader rode tall on a black stallion, coat long, hat low. When he pulled the bandana from his mouth, the crowd knew his face. Caleb Pike, Asa's younger brother. The cattle baron's blood ran colder in this one. His jaw was sharp, his smile cruel, his eyes lit with fire that Asa had only ever rented with coin. Caleb spoke like a whip-crack. "So my brother lies dead, and you celebrate with lanterns. You'll pay for every breath he lost." Mara staggered forward, her gown heavy with grief. "Caleb, stop this. Asa was no saint. You know it. Saint or sinner, he was blood." Caleb spat. and blood calls for blood. The riders fanned out, rifles trained on the crowd. The townsfolk huddled, fear washing the brief courage from their faces. Old Tahoma stood calm, hands loose at his sides, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Jonah pressed against Eli, whispering, "We can't fight that many." Eli's voice was low, steady. "We don't have to. We just have to hold 'em." Caleb sneered, leveling his pistol at Eli. "You're Maddox, the stray who thought he could carve a place in a land that don't want him. You killed Asa. That makes you mine." The pistol gleamed in the starlight, but Eli didn't flinch. His words carried across the bowl. "Your brother died because greed bought his law and sold his soul. You're standing in the same dust, Caleb. You'll choke on it the same way." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some townsfolk raised lanterns higher, defiance trembling back to life. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll see whose fire burns longer." He raised his hand. "Take the town. Leave none standing." The riders spurred forward, the arroyo exploding in motion, shouts, hooves, the crack of gunfire splitting the night. Eli shoved Jonah flat, raised his rifle, and fired. One rider toppled, horse screaming as it crashed into another. Dust clouded, lanterns fell, sparks flying. Mara ducked behind a wagon, clutching the hem of her ruined gown. Her eyes found Eli through the chaos, wide with fear, but also something fiercer, something that hadn't been there before. Old Tahoma whirled his knife, dragging one rider from his saddle in a single stroke. Townsfolk threw stones, swung shovels, whatever weapons they could find. But still the riders came, a tide of vengeance in the night. And Eli Maddox knew. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was the birth of a war. The arroyo turned into a furnace of smoke and dust. Gunfire cracked like dry wood snapping, horses reared, and the shouts of men tangled with the screams of women clutching lanterns. Shadows leapt across the canyon walls, twisting in the firelight as though the desert itself bore witness. Eli fired until the borrowed rifle clicked empty. He hurled it aside, drew his Colt from Jonah's trembling hand, and stepped into the chaos. Each shot rang true, but for every rider that fell, 2 more pressed forward. The tide felt endless. Caleb Pike rode through the smoke like a dark judge, his black stallion rearing high, eyes burning. He fired into the crowd, scattering townsfolk. "This ground belongs to the Pike name," he bellowed, "and it'll drink your blood till sunrise." Old Tahoma moved silent and sure, blade flashing, cutting reins, toppling riders from their mounts. Each strike was a prayer whispered to the dust. He met Eli's eyes once across the storm and gave a single nod. "Hold fast." Mara ducked beneath a fallen wagon, her torn gown soaked in blood, not her own. She pressed her hand against a ranch wife's wound, whispering comfort, though her voice shook. The woman's child clung to her skirts, eyes wide as lanterns. Mara looked up, face streaked with ash, and shouted toward Eli, "They'll kill us all." Jonah scrambled beside her, clutching a lantern like a weapon. "Not if we burn 'em first." The boy smashed it against a rider's boot, flame rushing up the man's leg, horse bolting wild into the fray. Sparks leapt onto dry brush, fire catching fast. The blaze spread, licking up the canyon wall, lighting Devil's Table in a crown of orange. The riders hesitated, their silhouettes thrown sharp against the inferno. Some pulled back, uneasy under the growing roar. Eli seized the moment. He leapt onto a fallen horse, raised his Colt, and shouted to the townsfolk, "Drive them into the fire, now!" Rocks flew, pitchforks thrust, desperate courage igniting as fast as the flames. The crowd surged together, pushing the riders toward the blaze. Caleb roared, pistol flashing, but his men faltered, horses screaming at the heat. One after another, they wheeled back, scattering into the night. But Caleb did not flee. He spurred his black stallion straight through the smoke, eyes locked on Eli. "You'll answer for Asa," he snarled, raising his pistol. The 2 men met in the heart of firelight, dust swirling, guns drawn. For a moment the whole arroyo held its breath, caught between flame and fate. Their shots rang out as one. The two shots rang in a single terrible note. Smoke braided the arroyo into a grey curtain, and when it thinned, Eli saw Caleb Pike sag in the saddle, one hand clutching his side, face gone suddenly small beneath that wide hat. The black stallion reared and bolted, throwing its rider into the dust where he rolled like a broken thing. Eli's chest tightened, but there was no time for triumph. Around him men still fought. The fire licked at dry brush, and the night tasted of iron and tar. He shoved through a tangle of fallen reins and bodies, boots striking something hard. A pistol skittered under a wagon, catching a sliver of moon. He snatched it, felt its weight, and kept moving. Mara stood at the wagon's edge, hands trembling, eyes searching for the pulse of any life she could mend. Her face was a map of soot and grief. When Eli reached her, she looked up, and for a moment the fury and fear in both of them softened into something like recognition, a shared map of scars. "Did he?" she began, voice thin. Eli cut her off with a gesture. "Alive or dead, he's not the only problem. Look." At the rim of the arroyo, shadows moved like a slow tide. Figures that had not been there before, men in dusted coats with rifles steady, slid down into the wash. Not all were pike riders. Some bore no brand. Some had faces the town had never seen. They moved with the kind of patience that came from being paid well and waiting long. Old Tahoma's hand touched Eli's arm. "More are coming," he muttered. "This is bigger than a pike quarrel. Someone else made sure you'd have enemies tonight." Eli's teeth ground. He felt hollowed, like a canyon wind had turned through him. He had thought the night a reckoning. Now it smelled like arrangement. He had killed Boone in what had been the small justice of the moment. Boone's gun had been leveled at a child, but Boone's fall had blasted open a ledger he had not known existed. Jonah appeared beside them, face streaked, eyes wild. "They're saying Boone had men paid too." He couldn't finish. Mara stared at Eli like a woman trying to read a ledger in a foreign tongue. "Who would want this? Who profits from the blood?" Eli's jaw tightened. He looked toward the town where lanterns burned low and frightened hands clutched whatever they could find. "Someone who's been hiding behind both sides," he said. "Someone who wants the land unsettled so they can buy cheap while folks bleed." A laugh, thin and humorless, answered from the shadow. A man stepped forward, hat brim low, but not Caleb, not Asa. His face was familiar in the way a new scar becomes familiar. Sheriff Boone's deputy, Silas Hargrove, whom many thought had left town with Asa's coin weeks ago. He wore Boone's old badge on a string around his neck, tarnished but visible. "You think it was only blood for coin?" Silas called, voice flat. "You think it was only Asa who bought laws? Those who control water and roads control 100 towns. Boone kept the ledger clean for years. Now that ledger is overdue." He spat to the side. "You killed a sheriff. You lit a fire, Maddox. Do you know what grows in a field you scorch?" Eli's hands curled around the pistol. "Then you tell us what you are. You tell us whose hand signs the checks." Silas smiled without humor. "I'm a man who makes sure the fields don't grow weeds. Men like Caleb were the muscle. Men like Boone were the ink. And men like you, you're the spark. Now the owners come see what their land's worth when it's ash." The arroyo shifted. Voices rose in alarm. From the rim came the sound of more horses, long and steady. The approach of riders not bent on theft but on assessment, men who carried ledgers and titles and the silence of lawyers. Eli recognized the cadence of corporate steps, measured, inevitable. The frontier had traded pistols for paper, and paper brought its own guns. Mara's hand found Eli's sleeve. "You brought this," she said, not as accusation, but as simple fact laid bare. "You called the town. You killed Boone. You pulled a thread, and the whole weave unraveled." He didn't argue. He had called them. He had believed truth could rally a town. He had believed a man's aim could stand against a ledger's weight. He had been wrong in the way a man is wrong who learns. The world prefers paper to pulse. Old Tahoma's voice cut low. Paper kills slow, but it kills sure. We need a plan to meet both the gun and the ledger. Eli looked at the town, at the wagon that had been their lifeline tonight, at the women bandaging wounds with torn skirts, at Jonah steadying trembling hands. The people gathered made a brittle sort of strength. They were cowed and furious and raw, but they were still there. He thought of vows Mara's once, his own perhaps unspoken, and of the land that had no use for promises. The wind curled through the arroyo like a question. "We hold Devil's Table tonight," Eli said at last. "We push back what we can with shot and shovel. Then at dawn we go find whose name is on that ledger. We take the paper to light, or we put our names on it. Either way we answer." Mara's eyes searched his face, and in them he saw a flash of the woman who had once chosen him over hunger. She nodded once, slow as a reckoning. "Then we start." Her voice had the thin metal of someone who'd learned to harden. They moved as one, men handing out pistols, women collecting water and oil, old Tahoma matching riders to those who could hold them. Jonah ran like a boy given purpose, carrying messages, setting small fires as signals to confuse any pursuers. The townsfolk, rallied and raw, took positions as if they had been born to them. From the rim the new riders slowed. The men with ledgers watched the arroyo burn and debate the cost in coin. Inside the bowl, a ragtag militia of shopkeepers, ranch hands, and broken brides readied themselves for the duel the paper men could not foresee. Eli felt the weight of it, the responsibility and the enmity settle like a bruise across his shoulders. He had wanted answers. Answers had come, larger, uglier, and colder than any pistol shot. The frontier's debts were not paid in blood alone. The sky lightened a fraction toward the east. Dawn would break in hours. For now they had ash, oaths, and one stubborn choice: to fight with things that could fall under lead, or to fight a ledger filled with names that smiled in offices far beyond Devil's Table. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The first pale streaks of dawn cut across the canyon walls, painting Devil's Table in bruised lavender and rust. Smoke still rose from the brush fires, and the acrid scent clung to every coat, every scrap of cloth. The townsfolk moved like ghosts, exhausted, bloodied, but standing. Eli sat on a boulder near the rim, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed east. He hadn't slept. The ledgermen would come with the daylight. He could feel it in the stillness, as if the desert itself held its breath for their arrival. Mara stepped beside him, her gown now a ragged canvas of ash and dried blood. She offered him a canteen, her hand steady despite the tremor in her eyes. "Drink," she said. "You'll need your voice when they come." He took it, swallowed, and wiped his mouth. "Voice won't stop them, Mara. Paper's sharper than bullets when it's wielded by the right hand." Her gaze flicked toward the town below, where old Tahoma directed folk to fortify the wagons into barricades. "Then we tear the paper before they can write our names on it." Hoofbeats echoed down the slope, slow, deliberate, unlike the wild rush of Pike's riders. A line of horses approached, each mounted by a man dressed neat, dust brushed from coats, boots polished. At their head rode a figure in a broad-brimmed hat, spectacles catching the morning light, a leather folio strapped to his saddle. Silas Hargrove walked ahead of them, smug as a man who had delivered victory. "Here he is," Silas called, gesturing toward Eli, "the killer of sheriffs, the breaker of vows, the spark in the haystack. Do with him as you see fit." The lead rider dismounted. He wasn't a gunman, but his boots clicked sharp against stone as though the land itself bowed. He flipped open the folio, drew out a sheaf of documents sealed with wax. His voice was crisp, Eastern, untouched by dust. "By authority of the Western Land and Rail Syndicate, I claim ownership of Devil's Table, its water rights, and the surrounding valley. Any resistance to this claim will be considered trespass and subject to removal by force." Gasps rippled through the townsfolk. Jonah clutched at Eli's sleeve. They can't just take it, can they? Eli's jaw tightened. With paper, they can. Old Tahoma's voice rose from the crowd, rough and sure. Land has no owner, only caretakers. Syndicates rot, but the mesa remains. The official didn't flinch. Romantic notions don't change signatures. We bought Boone. We bought Pike. The ink is dry. He turned a cold gaze to Eli. But you, Maddox, you lit a fire that threatens profit. The syndicate has no use for sparks. Mara stepped forward, voice breaking like glass yet ringing true. Then you'll have to stamp us all out, because this town still breathes, and breath is louder than ink. The official's smile was thin, brittle. He nodded to Silas. Men reached for their rifles. Eli rose, squaring his shoulders, Colt heavy at his side. "You've got your paper," he said. "We've got ash, and we've got iron. Let's see which one the wind carries farther." The sun broke the horizon, spilling fire across the rim. The syndicate's rifles gleamed in that light, lined against a town armed with little more than courage and what few bullets remained. Devil's Table had become the frontier's courtroom, and the verdict was about to be written in blood or torn from the page altogether. The morning heat bent the arroyo into a mirror that made every face twice as tired. Men in neat coats stood like punctuation marks against the ragged sentence of the town. Their papers rustled soft as dry leaves, a sound that made Eli's skin crawl the way a snake's shadow does on a sunlit path. The syndicate's men kept their distance, rifles angling like threats. Their leader adjusted his spectacles as if the dust were merely an irritant and not the grit of 100 livelihoods under his thumb. Eli walked the line between them and his people, Colt loose at his hip, eyes taking inventory. Jonah's white-knuckled grip on a rifle, old Tahoma steady as a post. Mara's split lip and the set of her jaw. Behind them, the town had organized itself into a crude fortress of overturned wagons and stacked crates. Women handed out water. Men loaded what ammunition remained. They were tired, yes, but they were not yet willing to fold. "Gentlemen," the syndicate official called, voice as smooth as a polished desk. "We can avoid blood if you sign, recognize our claim, agree to a lease favorable to our interests, and we will invest in infrastructure, roads, irrigation. Leave your names on the dotted line, and you'll have work, stability." Stability, Eli thought. A polite word for leashes. He glanced at the faces around him. Some townsfolk looked at the promise like a bandage on a broken limb. Others seemed to taste the bitterness of it. Jonah's knuckles whitened. "You'd buy us," old Tahoma said, voice like gravel. "Not the land. You'd buy our silence." The official smiled. "Of course. Purchase secures peace." Mara stepped forward, wind pulling at the ragged edges of her dress, eyes bright with an anger that was no longer only grief. "You'll buy the land and sell us tenancy. You'll shape our water and name our wages. And when we cannot pay, you'll take what's left. That is not peace. That is bondage." A murmur rose that surprised even Eli. The syndicate men shifted, their polished shoes finding less sure purchase on the arroyo's stones. For all their papers and ledgers, they had not expected the word bondage to cut like a blade. The official folded the sheaf of documents, the wax seals glinting. "Then you force our hand. We are authorized to secure the property. Resistance will be met with removal." Eli's mouth tasted of dust and iron. He could hear the ledgermen tallying losses in their heads, adding columns where they thought they saw profit. He remembered Boone's badge, filthy now, and unclaimed in the dirt, and the easy way authority had been sold. "Remove us," Eli said. "But know this, you may have titles and signatures, but the land remembers who raised it. It remembers hands that planted and bodies that stood guard. You cannot lease the memory of a place." Silas Hargrove laughed, short and boxy. "Memory doesn't pay investors, Maddox. Money does. And money buys men like you a ticket out if you choose it." Jonah stepped forward, then small, raw voice, unsteady but clear. "We ain't got coin for your tickets. All we got is this place. We'll die here if we must, but we won't be sold thin like beef." His words landed like stones. One of the syndicate men raised a rifle. The official's hand stilled. He disliked guns in the same way a surgeon dislikes blood necessary, distasteful, to be used with precision. He signaled, and 2 riders from his ranks moved forward, men whose faces had the practiced indifference of collectors. Old Tahoma watched them with a patience that was almost prayer. "They bring hired hands and paper. We bring hands used to the land." He spat. "We won't sign what was never ours to sell." The 2 sides edged closer until the space between them was a measure of the decision. The syndicate's riders had the kind of stillness that comes from long practice men who had been paid to take things gently, then taught to take them by force when necessary. Around them, the townsfolk tightened their grips, some clutching rusted tools turned into weapons. A woman from the crowd, a laundress with a jaw set like flint, stepped up beside Mara. "We don't want war," she said. "But we won't bend to ink." The official's eyes lingered on her, then on the sheaf of documents. "You can choose life," he said. "Sign, and life will be orderly." "Orderly?" Mara scoffed. "You mean owned." For a long breath the world held. Then a shot cracked not a rifle's long call, but a staccato report from the syndicate line. A rider across the rim fell from his horse, a thin crimson staining the dust where he hit. Panic flared like tinder. Men leapt, horses reared, and the arroyo erupted. Eli's body moved before thought. He fired, took cover, and heard the panic in Jonah's shout. The syndicate's careful men scattered into the chaos, rifles barking in a frantic attempt to regain control. The official dropped behind his folio, face ashen with the knowledge that his neat plan had become something else. Silas Hargrove darted forward, eyes assessing, hat tilted like a question mark. "You started this," he hissed. "You lit the first gun." Eli didn't answer. He only kept firing, each shot a punctuation against the noise. Old Tahoma moved like a ghost through the melee, cutting reins, toppling riders who'd thought themselves above dirt. Mara ran, hands extended, dragging the wounded behind wagons, pulling the living into cover. When the smoke thinned, 3 men lay dead, 2 syndicate riders and one of the town's unfortunates, a man who'd only hoped to protect his family. Wails rose, and for a moment the arroyo felt like a stomach emptying itself of courage. The official staggered up, papers fluttering from his folio like frightened birds. He spoke then, voice ragged as if someone had crumpled his certainties. "This is not how investments proceed. It is how people fight for the only thing they have left," Old Tahoma said. Silas moved beside the official, voice low. "They can kill 2 of ours, but we can outlast them. We have the law in our pockets, and men with ledgers will bring reinforcements. This town will be suffocated by contracts and creditors yet." Eli's eyes burned with a tired fire. He thought of Boone, of Asa, of the ledger men who could call for more men and more irons at the stroke of a pen. He thought of Mara, whose betrayal had set a chain of events in motion, and of Jonah, who had become braver than the years his face should have allowed. "We fight the gun now," Eli said quietly, "and the paper later. We make them bleed for every inch they claim on their pages." Mara's hand found his fingers, quick and sure. "Then we make it costly," she said. From the rim, the sound of more horses drifted measured. Sure, the cadence of men coming not for a negotiation but to tally profits. The arroyo braced itself. Paper and powder each had their champions. The question left hanging in the smoke was which would prove more ruthless. At the far edge of the wash, a rider approached apart from the syndicate line coat, too plain for their ranks, face shaded by a hat pulled low. He dismounted slowly, tied his horse, and walked toward the town with the gait of a man who had ridden long and been through worse. When he pulled back his hat, the town recognized him. A judge once thought gone from the circuit, Judge Emmett Hale, whose decisions had once carried the shape of law through 3 counties. He had eyes that had seen ledgers and men alike. "Name your terms," Judge Hale said, voice even. "Because if you mean to bleed, you must bleed with purpose." Judge Emmett Hale walked into the arroyo like a man carrying a verdict instead of a body. Dust lay in the fold of his coat. His boots had known long roads and harder choices. He paused where the burned wagons made a low wall, eyes taking in the tired faces and the smoking sky. The papermen watched him like a jury hoping for mercy. The townsfolk watched him like a judge who might remember what justice smelled like. "You called me," Hale said, voice plain. "You sent the signal. Speak your cause before men with pens and men with guns decide it for you." Eli stepped forward, the set of him different, now less the lone scout, and more the man who had become the town's spine. He spoke without flourish. "The Western Land and Rail Syndicate claims what they can buy. Boone sold his badge. Asa sold his loyalty, and men came to take what we tended. We answered with iron and with blood because we had no paper to seal us against theft. We want our water, our roads, and the rights to keep our homes. We will sign a covenant to steward the land fairly, or we will burn the ledger that lets syndicates treat people as investments." The judge listened, letting each word sink like stones into the arroyo's thin soil. Silas Hargrove and the syndicate official bristled. Their plans had not expected law to lean towards sweat-stained men. The official produced the contracts again, fat with wax and clauses, and read passages that smelled of towns bought in ink. He spoke of titles, of rail routes, of investor returns. Judge Hale folded the papers shut and did something the syndicate had not budgeted for. He walked among the townsfolk. He listened to the laundress, to the ranch hand with an arm burned, to Mara who stood with ash on her sleeves and a steadiness in her jaw that belonged to promise and ruin alike. He knelt by the child who had watched the fight and steadied the small hand that would be asked to inherit the land's troubles. When he rose, his face had softened in some places and hardened in others. "The law remembers counties and covenants," he said, "but it also remembers a people who have lived on their ground longer than any signature." He turned to the syndicate. "You may claim title, but title without use is hollow. I can't nullify your purchase contracts matter beyond the arroyo, but I can demand conditions. I can demand that leases be fair, that water rights be shared, that local councils be formed to oversee use. If you refuse, I can levy costs on your claim that make profit thin." Silas Hargrove's smile thinned. The official's hand tightened on the folio. He had spreadsheets in his head that did not account for stubborn judges or for men who would not bow. "Sign these terms," Hale continued, producing a fresh page, plain as desert bone. "Lease agreements that guarantee labor rights, shared water, and local councils with veto power over fencing and privatization. If you disagree, you may take your case to higher courts. But if you come back with soldiers, you will answer in a courtroom that hears blood and accounts alike." For a long breath the arroyo held its judgment. The syndicate's men conferred in whispers, the click of coin in their tongues. Finally, the official looked to his riders, to the man with the ledger, and then back at the faces around him, faces lined with loss, faces that had been painted with their dead. He set his pen to the new page, the wax seal forgotten for a time. He signed. A murmur rose like surf. Some townsfolk cried outright. Others stood with a slow disbelief, as if the world had given them a thing they had not dared expect. Judge Hale had not dissolved power. He had shifted it, tethering it to terms that could not be bought in a single night. Silas Hargrove did not sign. He spat on the dust and walked toward his riders, a cold promise in his stride. "You haven't seen the last of it," he said, though he paused at the rim, measuring the judge and the town and the ash between them. When the syndicate rode off, the arroyo did not rejoice easily. There were funerals to dig, wounds to mend, and debts that ink could not erase. Mara walked to Eli's side, the day's light painting her in soft gold. She reached for him without a word, fingers finding his in a touch that said the vows they had once mangled could perhaps be reshaped into something truer. Eli looked out toward Devil's Table where vultures circled like punctuation. He thought of Boone's badge, of Asa's promises, of the ledgermen who had come with polished shoes and cold eyes. He had wanted revenge at the start, a clean line drawn in blood. He had found something harder, a town that would not be sold, a bride who had paid for her choice in grief, and a justice written at dawn by a judge who remembered how to read both law and land. Old Tahoma climbed a rock and spat, then grinned with a narrow miracle. Jonah bounded up beside him, cheeks streaked with smoke, eyes bright as if he had seen the future and decided to be part of it. Mara's voice was small and fierce. "We bury them, we mend what we can, and we remember." She squeezed Eli's hand. "I will make it right where I can by keeping the water shared, by telling the truth when the contracts try to lie." Eli nodded. He did not tell her he forgave her. He simply let the work ahead stand between them and offered the steadiness of a man who would hold his post. The frontier had taken from them nocturnes of fear. It had given them a morning of hard bargains and kinder law. As the townsfolk began to move, digging bodies from the dirt, tending the wounded, stacking what goods the fire had spared, Judge Hale called the town to a circle. "You will draft a covenant," he said. "You will name stewards. I will see that the syndicate's signature binds them to your terms. But remember, vigilance is a work of years, not a single dawn." Eli stood a while longer, looking at the valley that would keep their names in its memory. Mara beside him, he felt the land's cold breath and its stubborn warmth. They had no answers for all the future's reckonings, no illusions about the ledger's long reach. But they had a start, a paper that bore both pen and a promise, and people who would sign their names not to surrender but to stand. The sun climbed, light spilling over Devil's Table and washing the arroyo into color. In the distance, a rider appeared on the horizon, someone coming with news or with new demands. The frontier's work never truly ends. Eli tightened his hand around Mara's fingers and let the world continue step by step. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West.